In 1966, in a small high school in Rabun Gap, Georgia, an English teacher named Eliot Wigginton handed his students a problem. The mountain culture their grandparents had carried for 200 years was dying faster than anyone was paying attention to. The cabin builders were gone, the blacksmiths were gone, the basket weavers were dying, and the granny women, the mountain herbalists who had pulled their families through pneumonia, childbirth, snakebite, and the terror of a child's high fever for 3 centuries on Appalachian soil, were in their 80s, with no one writing down what they knew. Wigginton handed his students notebooks and tape recorders and sent them up the hollers to interview their own grandmothers. The result was Foxfire magazine, and after that the 12 Foxfire books, the most important written record of Appalachian folk knowledge ever assembled. The heart of the books, the part the students were most desperate to capture before the knowledge died, was the medicine. 300 years of Scotch-Irish, Cherokee, German and African-American healing traditions, blended in the isolation of the southern mountains into a system of family medicine unlike anything else in America. The granny women called it the old ways. Most of them are gone now. The plants are not. Today we count down 25 dying Appalachian Mountain remedies that granny women carried for 300 years before commercial medicine, federal regulators, and the slow death of the holler reached up and took them. Number 20 was the bitter tonic every mountain mother kept in a glass jar above the stove. Number 11 was the women's medicine the United States Pharmacopoeia removed in 1916 with no warning. Number 6 was the cough medicine Cherokee healers and Scotch-Irish midwives both reached for, displaced inside a decade by a corporate trademark. Number 1 was the granny midwife's central remedy for 3 centuries. Taken off pharmacy shelves in the same decade, state laws drove the granny midwives themselves out of business. They were not lost because the plants died. The plants are still there. What was lost was the unbroken chain. Hit subscribe. Let us count down. Number 25. The rabbit tobacco, also called life everlasting. The silvery leafed plant with the tiny white flowers grew along every old fence row in southern Appalachia. The Cherokee and the mountain people who learned from them dried the leaves and either smoked them in a clay pipe or brewed them into a strong tea for asthma attacks, hard wet coughs, persistent chest colds, and the deep wheeze of pneumonia. The smoke quieted the bronchial spasm. The tea loosened the chest. The plant still grows along every old farm fence in the mountains. Number 24. The jewelweed. The tall succulent plant with the orange spotted flowers that grows in the same wet ditches as poison ivy, almost as though placed there by intentional design. Every mountain mother taught her children to recognize jewelweed on sight. When a child came home covered in the angry red rash of poison ivy, the mother snapped the watery stem, crushed the juicy pulp between her palms, and rubbed it directly into the rash before it could spread. The blistering stopped. The itch faded. The compounds in the sap bind to the urushiol oil of poison ivy before it can react further with skin. Number 23. The sourwood honey. The southern Appalachian Mountains contain a tree called the sourwood that grows nowhere else in America in any concentration. For 3 weeks every July, the sourwood blooms with thousands of small white bells, and the mountain beekeepers who keep hives within range harvest a light amber honey that has no equal in the entire American honey industry. Sourwood honey was the granny woman's premium medicine, applied to wounds that would not heal, eaten by the spoonful for coughs that would not quit, fed to children too sick to eat anything else. The mass-produced clover honey at the grocery store is not the same medicine. Number 22. The sweet violet syrup. Every Appalachian spring, the dark purple flowers of the wild violet bloomed across every shaded hillside in clusters that turned whole creek banks the color of indigo. Mountain mothers gathered the flowers by the apron full, simmered them slowly with honey and water for half a day, and bottled the dark fragrant syrup as the family cough medicine for the year. The mucilage in the flowers soothed the irritated throat. The saponins loosened deep mucus. The flowers still cover the same hillsides every spring. Number 21. The crab apple poultice. The small sour wild apples of the southern Appalachian forests were almost too tart to eat raw, but were the granny woman's go-to for inflamed skin. When a child had a red swollen rash that would not calm, when a man had a hot painful boil that would not come to a head, the woman of the house grated several crab apples to a pulp, wrapped the pulp in clean muslin, and laid the cool compress directly over the inflamed area. The malic acid drew the heat out. The tannins tightened the swollen tissue. Number 20. The yellow root. This is our first pattern break. The small Appalachian shrub with bright yellow roots and innocent-looking purple flowers was the bitterest tonic in the granny woman's cabinet and the most used. Every mountain mother kept a glass jar of dried yellow root shavings on a high shelf, ready for the moment a child came down with sore throat, a man with mouth ulcers from chewing tobacco, an old woman with weak digestion, or a baby with thrush. The shavings were chewed directly or simmered briefly into a tea so bitter that grown men flinched. The compound responsible is called berberine, the same active ingredient that drives the antimicrobial action of golden seal and Oregon grape. Modern research confirms it kills many of the bacteria responsible for oral and gastrointestinal infection. Yellow root was widely sold by southern country doctors until the 1940s, when commercial antiseptic mouthwashes and synthetic antibiotics displaced every traditional bitter from American medicine cabinets. The plant still grows beside every Appalachian creek. The jar is no longer above the stove. Number 19. The chickweed. The small, low-growing weed with the tiny white star-shaped flowers, considered a nuisance in every American lawn, was a Depression-era Appalachian grocery item and medicine cabinet item simultaneously. The fresh tender leaves were eaten in salads as a spring tonic, packed with vitamin C. The same leaves crushed into a green paste were applied to slow-healing wounds, eczema, and the persistent skin infections that working hands developed in the mountains. Modern research confirms the plant contains compounds that reduce skin inflammation and speed tissue regeneration. Number 18. The mountain mint. Not the cultivated peppermint of the supermarket tea aisle. The wild Appalachian mountain mint, with narrow gray-green leaves and clusters of small white flowers, growing in dry meadows through the southern mountains. The leaves contain a concentration of pelargon and menthol stronger than any cultivated mint. Mountain women dried bunches of the herb in the rafters every August and brewed it through the winter for indigestion, gas, headaches, and the cramping pains of menstruation. The tea was strong enough to clear blocked sinuses. Most modern Appalachians have never tasted it. Number 17. The persimmon bark. The Native American persimmon tree, with the small orange fruit that turns sweet only after the first hard frost, was a fall staple in every mountain holler, but the inner bark of the persimmon tree was a granny woman's medicine. When a child came down with severe diarrhea, when an adult had bloody stools from dysentery, when a man had a sore throat that would not heal, the woman of the house peeled a piece of fresh persimmon bark, boiled it slowly into a dark astringent tea, and gave it by the cup. The tannins contracted the inflamed tissue and stopped the bleeding. Number 16. The beech bark. The smooth gray-barked tree of the Appalachian uplands gave mountain healers a different kind of medicine. The inner bark of the American beech, scraped thin and boiled into a strong tea, was used for chronic diarrhea, persistent intestinal inflammation, and the slow recovery of soldiers and miners who had survived dysentery but never quite recovered their digestive strength. The tannins in beech bark are gentle enough for daily use. The bark can still be carefully peeled without harming the tree. Number 15. The maypop. This is our second pattern break. The wild Appalachian passionflower vine, with the impossibly intricate purple and cream blossoms that look more like jewelry than flowers, grows along every fence row in the southern mountains. The Cherokee used the dried leaves of the maypop for centuries as a remedy for restless sleep, anxiety, racing thoughts, and what the elders called the trembling of the heart. White settlers in the southern mountains adopted the practice. The plant was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1863 until 1936. By the 1940s, the entire category of plant-based sedatives had been displaced by patented synthetic benzodiazepines, which were stronger, more addictive, and more profitable. Modern research has confirmed that compounds in the maypop bind to the same receptors in the brain that benzodiazepine sleep medications target, but gently, without the dependency or the morning fog. The flower is still called a maypop because the unripe seed pods, when stepped on by a barefoot child, pop like balloons. Number 14. The branch lettuce. The earliest spring green of the Appalachian Mountains, growing along the cold trickling stream banks called branches in mountain speech, with tender pale leaves available before any other plant. Every Appalachian family for 300 years harvested branch lettuce as the first vitamin-rich food of the year, eaten raw or wilted in bacon grease and vinegar. The greens broke the long winter scurvy. They restored color to children's faces. They marked the first sign of spring. Most mountain families now buy frozen spinach at the grocery store. Number 13. The wormwood. The bitter silver-leafed herb that European immigrants brought across the Atlantic and planted in every Appalachian dooryard garden as both ornament and medicine. Wormwood was the granny woman's universal remedy for intestinal parasites, which afflicted nearly every barefoot child of a coal camp or holler family in the southern mountains. The dried herb was brewed into a strong tea and forced down a suspected child for 3 mornings running. The worms were expelled. The compound responsible is called thujone. It is the same compound that gave the European liqueur absinthe its reputation. The intolerable taste is remembered by every American over the age of 90. Number 12. The goldenrod. The tall yellow-plumed wildflower of late summer meadows, blamed by every American hay fever sufferer for the autumn allergies that are actually caused by ragweed blooming at the same time. The Cherokee and the Appalachian people who learnt from them used the dried flowering tops of goldenrod, brewed into a strong tea, for kidney pain, bladder infections, slow urination, and paradoxically for the relief of seasonal allergies. The plant contains compounds that reduce inflammation in the urinary tract and stabilize the histamine response that creates hay fever symptoms. Number 11. The stargrass. This is our third pattern break. Also called colic root, true unicorn root, or starwort. The small white-flowered plant with the silvery underside to its leaves grew in damp Appalachian meadows and was the central women's medicine of the southern mountains. The Cherokee taught the Scotch-Irish settlers what they had used for centuries. Granny midwives used the dried root of stargrass for menstrual cramps, irregular cycles, threatened miscarriage, weak labor pains, and the chronic exhaustion that came from a woman bearing 8 or 10 children on a mountain homestead. The root was officially listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1840 until 1916. Then in 1916, with no warning and no replacement remedy, the Pharmacopoeia simply removed it. The action coincided with the rise of synthetic uterine contractants developed for hospital obstetrics. The plant is now nearly extinct in much of its former range. The Cherokee knowledge of its preparation is held by only a handful of contemporary herbalists. Number 10. The wild plum bark. The small thorny wild plum trees of Appalachian fence rows, with the bright red fruits no bigger than a marble, gave mountain healers an inner bark used as a cough remedy and a respiratory tonic. The bark was peeled in narrow strips in early spring when the sap was rising, dried in the shade, and simmered into a strong dark tea for hard-hacking coughs, the slow congestion of late-stage pneumonia, and the chronic respiratory weakness of coal miners. The bark contains compounds that suppress the cough reflex at low doses. Number 9. The heel-all, also called self-heal. The small purple-flowered plant grows in every American lawn and roadside, brought across the Atlantic by European settlers and adopted into Appalachian medicine within a single generation. The name was not folklore. The granny women used the leaves as a wound poultice, as a sore throat gargle, and as a remedy for mouth ulcers and bleeding gums. The compound responsible is called rosmarinic acid. Modern research confirms it has documented antibacterial and antiviral effects, including against the herpes simplex virus. Number 8. The hops pillow. The climbing vine with the papery green flower cones that European brewers had used for 1,000 years to flavor beer, brought to Appalachia by Scotch-Irish settlers and quickly adopted by mountain healers as a sleep remedy. Granny women dried whole hops cones, sewed them into small muslin pillows, and tucked the pillows under the heads of restless children, of nervous old men, of women who could not stop their minds at night. The compound responsible is called methylbutanol. Modern research has confirmed it acts on the same brain receptors targeted by prescription sleep medications. Number 7. The sweet shrub. The native Appalachian shrub with the dark reddish-brown flowers that smell powerfully of strawberries and pineapple, called sweet shrub or Carolina allspice, was used by the Cherokee for centuries as a bark tea for kidney complaints, urinary infections, and as a wash for severe skin conditions. The bark and roots have a sharp aromatic flavor. The compounds responsible include several documented antimicrobials. The technique is now held by only a handful of mountain herbalists. Number 6. The spikenard root. This is our fourth pattern break. The tall, stately woodland plant with the large, dark berry clusters in late summer grew in shaded Appalachian coves and on the northern slopes of southern mountains. The Cherokee used the dried root of spikenard for centuries as the central respiratory medicine of the mountain south. When a child came down with whooping cough, when a coal miner's chest filled with the slow fluid of black lung disease, when an old man's bronchitis turned wet and dangerous, the spikenard root was simmered into a thick, dark tea, given by the cup 3 times a day, until the cough broke. The Scotch-Irish settlers of the southern mountains learned the remedy directly from Cherokee neighbors and passed it down for 200 years. The plant was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1830 until 1916. In the 1920s, the Vicks Chemical Company of Greensboro, North Carolina, began an aggressive national advertising campaign for its synthetic chest rub. Within a decade, the Vicks brand had displaced spikenard as the dominant cough remedy of the American South. The trademark on the synthetic version has outlasted 3 generations of mountain healers. Number 5. The Indian cucumber root. The small woodland plant with 2 layers of leaves arranged in perfect circles around a single dark berry, called Indian cucumber for the crisp white root that tastes faintly like cucumber, was used sparingly by the Cherokee and by mountain herbalists as a kidney medicine and a mild diuretic. The fresh root was chewed directly. The dried root was steeped into a weak tea. Because the plant takes 7 years to reach reproductive age, it is increasingly rare. The mountain herbalists who still know it harvest only what regrows naturally. Number 4. The ramps. The wild leek of the southern Appalachian forests, with broad green leaves and a powerful onion and garlic flavor, was the most important spring food of the mountain south for 300 years. Every Appalachian family gathered ramps from the same wooded coves their parents and grandparents had gathered them from. The bulbs and leaves were eaten as the first fresh green of the year, considered a powerful spring tonic that cleansed the blood, killed intestinal parasites, and restored strength after a long winter. Today, ramps sell in upscale restaurants for $20 a pound. Over-harvesting by commercial diggers has nearly stripped many traditional gathering coves bare. Number 3. The sweet gum tree. The tall, straight-trunked tree of the Southern American forest, with the star-shaped leaves and the spiky brown seed balls every barefoot child has stepped on, gave mountain healers 2 distinct medicines. The fragrant resin that beads from cuts in the bark was chewed as a primitive chewing gum, used to clean teeth and freshen breath. The same resin, dissolved in alcohol or applied directly, was a wound antiseptic of considerable strength. The Cherokee used sweet gum for sore throats, mouth ulcers, and dysentery. The seed balls themselves contain compounds with documented antiviral properties now being studied for influenza treatment. Number 2. The wahoo bark. Also called burning bush for the brilliant red color of the leaves in autumn, The small native Appalachian shrub gave mountain healers a bark used for centuries as a heart and liver tonic. When an old farmer developed the swollen ankles and shortness of breath that country doctors called dropsy, when a coal miner's lungs filled with fluid that no other medicine could move, when chronic fatigue and a weak pulse marked the slow failing of an aging heart, the wahoo bark tea was prescribed by the family doctor or the granny woman. The bark was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1820 until 1947. The plant still grows in southern Appalachian coves. Number 1. The black haw bark. This is our final pattern break and the most important entry on this list. The small Appalachian tree with the white spring flowers and the dark blue-black fruits in autumn, also called American sloe or stagbush, has an inner bark that the granny midwives of the southern mountains used for 300 unbroken years as the central remedy of women's reproductive medicine. Menstrual cramps that doubled a woman over, threatened miscarriage that would not stop, afterbirth pains that lasted for weeks, the slow recovery of a woman who had borne her 10th child on a mountain homestead with no doctor and no nurse and no electricity. The black haw bark was peeled by the granny midwife herself, dried in the shade behind her cabin and stored in muslin sacks above the kitchen door. It was the single most used women's medicine in the entire Appalachian Range, from the 1700s until the 1930s. The plant was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1882 until 1926. Then, in the same decade, the Pharmacopoeia removed black haw. State legislatures across the American South passed midwifery licensing laws that effectively eliminated the granny midwife from American medicine. The granny women were not licensed. The granny women could not be licensed. They had no degrees and no diplomas and no city addresses to mail an application to. By 1940, the women who had delivered American babies in mountain hollers for 3 centuries had been driven out of their own profession by legislation written in state capitals hundreds of miles away. The compound responsible is called scopoletin. Modern research confirms it relaxes uterine smooth muscle, exactly as the granny midwives had observed for 300 years. What was lost was not the medicine. What was lost was the woman who knew how to use it. These are 25 remedies, 25 plants of the American mountains gathered along creek banks, in dooryard gardens, in the hollers and on the ridges of one of the most isolated landscapes in North America. They are not exotic, they are not magical, they are the everyday medicine of one of the most resourceful populations in American history. Appalachian people were not poor, they were sovereign, they knew the plants, they taught their daughters, they taught their granddaughters. They built a system of family medicine that worked when no doctor would come up the holler road, when no road existed at all, when the federal government was a distant rumor and the only authority in the next cabin was the inherited knowledge of the woman who lived there. That system is dying. The Foxfire books wrote down most of it. The granny women who remembered the rest are passing one by one. The plants are still here. The mountains are still here. The hollers are emptying out as the children move to the cities, and the dooryard gardens go to weed, and the muslin sacks come down from above the kitchen door. Choose one, just one. The plant on this list that grows where you live, or that grew where your grandmother lived. Learn it. Grow it if you can. Read about it in Foxfire 1 through Foxfire 12. Tell me in the comments which plant you are choosing first, and which Appalachian community your own family came from. This is the forgotten apothecary. The mountains still stand. The medicine is still in the hills. The knowledge belongs to you.